Hello, I'm Esther Gidoi-Ewart. It's Tuesday, March 22nd. This is Africa 54.
A critical week for diplomacy as U.S. President Joe Biden heads to Europe for a special NATO summit as worries mount over possible Russian cyber, biological, and chemical weapons attacks. On this World Water Day, focusing on groundwater, which provides fresh water to much of the world. And Malawi launches an emergency national polio immunization campaign following the detection of its first case in 30 years.
U.S. President Joe Biden is warning of the potential for Russia to carry out cyber attacks against U.S. interests or deploy biological or chemical weapons in Ukraine as Russia's Ukrainian invasion nears the one-month point. The president says that his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, did not anticipate the extent of unity he would face in opposition to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and that, quote, his back is against the wall. Russia is rejecting Biden's warning, with Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov telling the media Tuesday that Russia, quote, does not engage in state-level banditry. The destruction of Ukraine continues on Tuesday as Russian airstrikes and artillery pound cities across much of the country. In the city of Mykolaiv, Russian bombs blasted a psychiatric hospital, turning much of the facility into rubble, leaving a massive crater outside the building, while also smashing windows. Doctors and workers are seen clearing some of the broken glass and debris. Russia's aerial bombardment of the capital Kyiv and the besieged southeastern city of Mariupol this week has also been devastating, destroying infrastructure, factories, and industrial enterprises. Later this week, President Biden is expected to attend a NATO summit, a G7 meeting, and a European Council summit in Brussels, all focused on the situation in Ukraine before traveling to Poland. The humanitarian situation as a result of the war in Ukraine is getting dire. The United Nations Refugee Agency says the number of refugees who have fled Ukraine since the Russian invasion began has now surpassed 3.5 million people. More than 2 million of the refugees have gone to Poland, 543,000 to Romania, 368,000 to Moldova, and 318,000 to Hungary. The UN General Assembly this week is expected to resume an emergency special session to vote on a draft resolution prepared by France and Mexico demanding an immediate stop to Russia's hostilities against Ukraine, especially attacks on civilians and civilian infrastructure. The text also demands the full protection of civilians, including humanitarian medical personnel, journalists, and foreign nationals, and people trying to flee the conflict. As we've mentioned, U.S. President Joe Biden travels to Europe this week for a special NATO summit aimed at diffusing the conflict in Ukraine and imposing more consequences on Russia. European nations fear this conflict could spread into their territory. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell reports from Washington, with reporting from Bill Gallo in Seoul.
President Joe Biden heads to Europe Wednesday in hopes that face-to-face talks with NATO, European, and G7 leaders will achieve what virtual diplomacy has so far failed to do: end Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The White House recognizes that this whirlwind trip aims to achieve a lot in very little time. He begins with the NATO summit on Russia Thursday.
He will also reaffirm our ironclad commitment to our NATO allies and to defend every inch of our NATO territory. Then he will join a scheduled European Council summit to discuss our shared concerns about Ukraine, including transatlantic efforts to impose economic sanctions on Russia, provide humanitarian support to those affected by the violence, and address other challenges related to the conflict. Later in the day, he will attend the G7 meeting called by Germany to further discuss with our allies and partners the consequences we are imposing on Russia for its war of choice.
In addition to imposing strict sanctions against Russia, the U.S. has also flooded Ukraine's coffers with $13.6 billion in military and humanitarian aid. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has begged the United States, to no avail, to establish a no-fly zone over his country. He has repeatedly warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin will not stop at Ukraine. A recent Russian strike on the western city of Lviv hit just 80 kilometers from the Polish border.
Next will be Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Moldova, Georgia, Poland. Then they will be walking until they reach the Berlin Wall.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently visited the Baltic nations to hear their concerns. Latvia's Deputy Prime Minister and Defense Minister told VOA that NATO members near Ukraine want to see some fundamental changes.
That basically we need a different type of forward presence for all the nations, starting from the south of Turkey till the north of the Baltics. And also the strategy should be, our philosophy of our defense of our alliance should be set in a different way.
Latvia's foreign minister told VOA that Eastern Europe sees no quick end to ongoing talks between Ukraine and Russia.
Our position is that Ukraine clearly is the country that should decide what kind of agreement it wants. No red lines, no pushing Ukraine, because Russia has attacked Ukraine and we must help Ukraine to defend its sovereignty, not to try to impose any kind of deal that wouldn't be in the best interest of Ukraine. So from that point of view, I don't want to be rather optimistic or pessimistic. I want to be realistic. I think that it may take some time.
From Brussels, Biden will head to Poland's capital on Friday. Meanwhile, less than 1,000 kilometers away, Ukraine burns. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
More people are fleeing Ukraine to neighboring countries as the war intensifies. Poland is seeing an influx of refugees. For a closer look at the refugee situation, I'm joined live from Lublin, Poland, by VOA's Mary Mgawe. Mary, you've been following the story of a Ghanaian refugee. What more can you share with us?
Yes, Esther, we met with this lady from Ukraine. She's married with a Ghanaian man, and she was very sad, very emotional when she arrived at the border of Madika, because she has to leave her husband and two sons behind to fight for their country, and she only left with two daughters.
Mary, it's very painful to leave one's family, especially during a war situation like this. Has she been able to contact her husband yet?
Yes, when we talked to her, she said she did not have any communication with her husband, but she only have hope maybe one day, once they arrive in Germany, because they were in transit to Germany, probably they will be able to cross the border, but she was not sure yet.
How has she been received in Medieka camp? Was she given the necessary, supplies and the kind of things that refugees are expecting to get when they land there?
Yes, at the border of Madika, once you arrive there, you see a lot of humanitarian helps over there. The refugees cannot lack anything, from clothes, you name it, water supplies, food and everything. So once they arrive, they sit over there, they get all the necessity they want, and then they transfer to another location that they're going.
Previously, we had a lot of African refugees running to different neighboring countries from Ukraine because of this war. And some of them were kicked out of the buses. There were complaints about how they were treated. How are African refugees being treated in Poland?
You know, for those people who we spoke to, but not Africans, really, we were not able to meet anybody from Africa, but they couldn't not witness anything like that, because they said when the invasion happened, most of the people from Africa, they left very early. And so it was very difficult to witness or to testify that they saw anything like that.
What more can you tell us, Mary, from where you are? I know you're planning to cover a little more of the situation there. What is your next move from Lublin?
No, we are going to stay here to Lublin, and then when we move, on Thursday we are planning to go to Warsaw. In Warsaw, we are planning to meet with Mozambican citizen there. That's where we can get our story again. They fled war in Ukraine also. They are staying in one family in Warsaw.
And you're able to get a good place to stay. You're able to get your own supplies. I know you're traveling with Karina Chaudhry, our, producer there. How are you guys, being treated there? Are you getting all the supplies you need?
Esther, I can tell you, we are living in a very nice hotel. I mean, everything we want, we get it. Things are very calm in the cities. You cannot even think about anything bad that could happen to anybody.
Well, thank you. At least you're in Poland and not Ukraine. Thank you so much, Mary. We look forward to more reporting. VOA's Mary Mugawe reporting live for us from Lublin, Poland. The British charity Oxfam International on Tuesday called for a massive mobilization of international humanitarian aid to help over 20 million people facing severe levels of hunger across East Africa. Mohammed Yusuf reports from Nairobi, Kenya.
We need that, please.
The British charity Oxfam International says more than 28 million people living in East Africa face hunger if rain fails this March. The aid group fears help may not come for millions as the world attention shifts to conflict in Ukraine.
For centuries, pastoralists have been extremely resilient and incredible coping mechanisms in very harsh conditions. But the current situation, the severity of the droughts and the long extension and how many countries are affected is breaking those traditional coping mechanisms. And in reality, we see that the climate crisis is present there, and they're suffering the worst consequences of something that did almost nothing to generate. So we know this is an issue of justice, because it's us, the global community, that needs to be aware and respond.
Millions face hunger as prices of commodities increase due to persistent drought, the coronavirus pandemic, and the conflict in Ukraine. The UK-based organization calls for mobilization of humanitarian aid to alleviate the suffering of millions in the region. Mohammed Yusuf for VOA News, Nairobi.
Mali's former Prime Minister Sumelu Bubai Maiga died Monday in a Bamako hospital, according to one of his lawyers. The 68-year-old was detained last August over his suspected role in the purchase of a presidential plane during the rule of former President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, who was ousted in a military coup a year earlier. Maiga was charged with multiple counts of graft and was awaiting trial. A relative told Reuters Maiga died at a clinic where he had been hospitalized on parole since December. Maiga, a former defense minister, was named prime minister in 2017 and resigned just 2 years later after a massacre of 160 Fulani herders by an ethnic vigilante group shocked the West African nation. Uganda's government must stop using illegal detention centers as a weapon against dissidents and close the facilities. US-based Human Rights Watch revealed Tuesday in a report documenting the prevalence of torture at the clandestine sites. The report featured interviews with 51 people, including 34 former detainees and eyewitnesses to abductions, who described a litany of abuse at the hands of police, army officials, and Uganda's domestic intelligence agency between April 2019 and November 2021. 22-year-old Ronald Segawa is one of the hundreds of people, the government critics and opposition supporters, who were detained and tortured in the last 3 years, according to Human Rights Watch.
It reached a stage where I told them to just kindly kill me because I wanted the suffering to end. The man told me that they did not work that way. Those are the words he told me. After saying that, he brought a flat iron, the one used for ironing laundry, and burnt me on my back. I still have the scars.
Really surprised if anybody would do. Again, use those methods. Because I called all the police leaders, I called the army people, distributed my guidelines widely. And my guidelines are not new, they are only sort of analyzing the usefulness of the existing standing orders, which are already there, but not followed.
Triggering international alarm at Uganda's rights record, The United States in December sanctioned former Chief of Military Intelligence Major General Abel Kandiho for horrific abuse by his unit, saying he was sometimes personally involved. Be sure to join us tomorrow when our technology report features a self-taught engineer teaching in Zambia. Coming up, Malawi launches an emergency national immunization campaign to eliminate an old nemesis. But first, Hedy Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
On the next Straight Talk Africa, we'll talk with African students who have returned home from Ukraine. What attracted so many of them to universities in the Eastern European country? And what is next for them? Also, Africa wants its doctors and nurses working abroad to return to the continent. We'll explore Africa's so-called brain drain and hear from the former president of Mauritius about ways to reverse it. Join me, Hedy Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Tuesday, March 22nd marks the 29th annual World Water Day. This year's focus is groundwater, which provides fresh water to much of the world. VOA's Michelle Quinn reports.
Under the soil, moving slowly through rock layers and inside aquifers, groundwater quietly coexists with us. It is the primary drinking water source for half of the world and a source of water for irrigating crops. And it's in trouble. The theme of this year's World Water Day, a UN Observance Day, is groundwater, its importance, and the threats it faces.
Groundwater is a really fascinating and frankly much under-discussed element of our water cycle.
As rain or snow seeps through the ground, it becomes groundwater, often clean and stored in the earth. Groundwater can be a backup source of water during times of drought when lakes and rivers dry up.
So groundwater is kind of the buffer for many irrigation places in the world to substitute for this lost surface water during droughts.
Environmental advocates are concerned that the world's biggest groundwater aquifers are being depleted faster than they are being replenished, and that can lead to other issues.
So that the ground starts to deplete or sink, and you can't refill that. Like, you can't repump that full of water. Once there's subsidence, you've lost that capacity for water storage.
Groundwater is also threatened by pollution and mismanagement.
And in many cases, the contamination that we see in groundwater is the product of things that happened decades back.
Environmental advocates say people should ask where their water comes from and push their elected officials to include water management in setting policies for future growth.
We need to make sure we're looking at the whole system and not just one piece of it.
With the world's population expected to keep growing, experts say that better understanding and managing of the planet's groundwater may be key to our future survival. Michelle Quinn, VOA News.
It's time for Health Report, and joining us in the studio is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest on Malawi's emergency polio vaccination campaign. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. It's so good to be back in the studio with you. Well, Malawi is launching an emergency national polio immunization campaign following the detection of its first case in 30 years. The diagnosis of a 4-year-old girl with wild polio virus in February is the first case in Africa in 5 years. The case is raising alarm as the continent was declared free of wild polio in 2020. Authorities are now rushing to inoculate nearly 3 million children under age 5. Polio is a highly infectious disease that spreads mainly through contamination by fishes and can cause paralysis and death. There is no cure, but experts say vaccination brought the world close to ending the wild form of the disease. In a bid to prevent renewed spread in Africa, WHO Africa says almost 70,000 vaccinators are going door to door in Malawi, Mozambique, Tanzania, Zambia, and Zimbabwe to give all children under 5 the oral polio vaccine. I spoke with Janet Kaita, the World Health Organization country representative in Malawi.
We still have the one case of the wild poliovirus type 1. There's no other cases, but we are strengthening surveillance, doing active case search, ensuring all health workers know what to look out for. Should they suspect polio, that they know exactly what it is that they should do. It is a concern, but it also is a good thing that the Malawi surveillance system was able to pick up this case. It is a setback, but what it does mean is that we have to work with urgency to ensure that we get ahead of the virus.
What does it tell us about containing polio? Is it even something that is possible in the long term?
It is absolutely possible. In fact, we were coming so close because just 2 countries across the world still have the wild polio virus. We do know what to do, which is to very quickly mount a vaccination campaign and really strengthen our surveillance systems, and also really make sure that the routine immunization system is strengthened.
So as you mentioned, Malawi is embarking on a mass polio vaccination drive. What are the main pillars of this campaign?
The main thing, because it is targeting all children under 5 everywhere in Malawi and across the border, because this is not a one-country effort. Based on the risk assessment, we absolutely know that it has to go beyond Malawi borders. For Malawi, for instance, we know we're targeting 2.9 million children. At the lowest administrative level, a clear knowledge of how to reach them, so a good understanding of the terrain. This is done through a process called micro-planning, through which every local administration knows how they're going to reach these children. The strategy is house to house. It's also looking broadly and seeing, are the children immunized? Is any of them paralyzed or show any signs of polio? Because it's both immunized children, but also undertake active case search. It is going to be done in 4 rounds, a month apart. After each round, understand very clearly how we have performed. Are there any missed children? Where are the missed children? And if necessary, mount what are called mop-up campaigns.
How do we ensure that we reach the last mile? Because not every place is accessible. How do we make sure this happens?
The oldest, most well-planned public health program is the immunization program. And already it works with a strategy that's called reaching every child. So if you live in Sanje district, for instance, the local administration, the hardest to reach place, the community health worker in Malawi called a health surveillance assistant can tell you how to get to those hardest to reach children. So the monitoring processes between rounds will be able to tell us whether we've reached every child or not, and how to correct this.
So how do we engage the community to participate? You can knock at somebody's door, but if they don't want you to vaccinate their child, are you going to force them?
So there's been very, very widespread public awareness building. We've been very lucky in Malawi that His Excellency himself has been speaking very directly to parents. The Public Affairs Committee of Parliament is mobilized, the Interreligious Council is mobilized, they're busy issuing calls to their congregation. Rotarians are helping. Every district has a health education officer. The community radios are publicly airing these announcements. So there's active community engagement, because the purpose is to remove all of the barriers that we know that stand between a mother, a caretaker, immunizing her child.
2 years ago, the continent was certified polio-free, and then now here we are. What lessons can be learned here?
I need to be very clear that this wild polio virus type 1 in Malawi does not take away from that certification. Okay. But we do have to demonstrate within the next 6 months, 1 year, that we're ahead, we've stopped the spread of the virus. The positive is that we are working with an expert team it's called the Global Polio Eradication Initiative that supports all countries if you have any kind of polio outbreak. And the micro-planning processes that accompany these campaigns have been tried and tested again, and working with a foundation of what is actually quite a good immunization system. So we're not starting from scratch. And we do have additional help. We do have 4 rounds, and with every single round, we learn lessons. We know who we're missing. We plan to do better.
Dr. Janet Kayita, thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Janet Kayita, the World Health Organization country representative in Malawi. That's our health report for today. Back to you, Esther.
You're not going anywhere, Lino. This is an unusual case, I would say, in Malawi. What are health experts telling you about the potential of polio spreading in Malawi and neighboring countries?
Well, you know, Esther, it's really concerning because, as we mentioned during the interview with Dr. Kayita, about 2 years ago, Africa was certified polio-free. Now, you know, it takes only 1 child for gains that have been made to be reversed. So health experts are very, very worried, and that's why, as I mentioned earlier in the introduction, Malawi will be vaccinating the children there. Also, Mozambique, Tanzania, and Zambia, Zimbabwe will follow suit. So it is really a comprehensive effort that they are putting together to make sure that this one case remains the only one in the region and for the continent.
Well said, Lino. Thank you so much. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54. Also, more news from voanews.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.